All right, so we've been talking about personality. This is the third video in the little series. Now we're going to wrap it up with trait theory. Now, trait theory comes to us because our statistical measures have changed. We've evolved as a science into more algorithmic calculations and a different way to investigate how people respond to different things. So, few definitional things. The first thing we're going to talk about is traits. And then I'm going to also define for you some of the specific qualities associated with trait theories. A trait is an enduring personality characteristic that manifests in behavior. We've already talked about how personality is this enduring pattern of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And so what we see in the trait perspective is that what we're quantifying and then how we're developing categories is that we are looking at the way people identify their behavior in different situations or scenarios. So you might have a question like, uh, I often seek advice before I make decisions, right? Is this statement somewhat like me, nothing at all like me, kind of like me, totally like me, right? And then you would indicate where you are. And what you're indicating in that is actually a behavior. And so what we're looking for are these sort of consistent behavioral responses. Trait theorists hypothesize that these traits, which are, characteristics that manifest as behavior, are the building blocks for personality. Trait theories believe that people that can be described by their behavior, their patterns of them. So not only are we saying that that's your personality, but we're also describing you based upon that. So you'll hear things like, oh, I'm an introvert, or oh, I'm an extrovert, or oh, I'm neurotic. Those are all personality trait theorist terms that we use to describe ourselves. The other thing that we typically see in trait theories is we have individuals rate themselves as strong or weak on those indices. In the example that I just gave you, somewhat like me, not at all like me, totally like me, those are strong versus weak indicators. We don't really look for present versus not present. We always want to keep things, theoretically, all those behaviors are there. It's whether or not it's a strong versus a weak tendency that we look at. Now, trait assessments, they use factor theory and statistics. I told you that this sort of conglomeration of theories came along as we developed advanced statistical methods. We look at a list of behaviors, emotions, and thoughts, and then they are rated by the subject or the participant. And then these ratings are taken together to assign values on a list of traits. Let's look at one of the trait theories. We're going to look at the two-factor theory first. Here, you're asked a series of questions that help us identify whether you are more stable versus unstable or more introverted versus extroverted. Now, it's a two-trait theory, but as you can see, there are a lot of terms on this little wheel here. And what they are is that they are mixtures of these different theories. So if you are really high on extroversion, you might answer questions about being active and sociable as, totally like me. Like these are things that I frequently do. Whereas if you're really high or strong in introversion or identified as introverted, you might identify strongly with being quiet or passive. Again, most of the statements are sort of behavioral definitions of what you are doing as an individual, and then you get to rate whether or not you are strong or weak or moderate on those qualities. And then we have stable and unstable. So if you are an unstable extroverted individual and you are really high on instability and high on extroversion, you might be identified as excitable. And let's say that you might even be higher on unstableness, and you might actually be identified as aggressive. If you can see how those descriptions actually work towards different extremes. There are words there that we like more than others. I certainly don't ever want to be referred to as rigid or anxious or moody, but there are definitely times and aspects and when that happens. Remember that when we're talking about personality, we're talking about those enduring characteristics, those things that are pretty consistent for the individual in different situations and circumstances. Another factor theory that we can talk about is the five-factor theory. The acronym can be OCEAN, it could be CANOE, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness. Same way that we get at the data and information here. We provide you with a list of statements, we ask you how much that statement is like you versus not like you, and then you're sort of quantified and placed into these different categories, being high on neuroticism, being low on agreeableness, being moderate on extroversion, being high on conscientiousness, and being low on openness. That's how your results would come out. And these are just a few of the different qualities. Feel free to pause this at any time if you want to take a good hard look at some of these. The one that I want to focus on is this the other five-factor theory. Now this is Jungian. This was sort of grown from a contemporary of Freud's. He came after Freud but said a lot of the sex and parent loving and all that stuff that Freud emphasized was not as important to understanding personality to Jung as it was to Freud. And so what he decided is that there are qualities, right? There are qualities and there are ways to talk about people. Now Jung was of a theoretical time where we didn't have the statistical advances. So he provided the theoretical foundation for a team of myers-briggs to come along and develop an actual measure that tests for this. Now, you may have already completed a Myers-Briggs. If you have not yet, you will. Most human resources departments, most hiring procedures for a lot of companies today focus on this Myers-Briggs assessment to see where people fall in these four quadrants, right? You sort of saw the four quadrants in the two-factor theory, and then we had, the five different levels in the OCEAN or the CANOE five-factor theory. Well, with the Jungian five-factor theory or the Myers-Briggs, we have four quadrants. You're identified as either an extrovert or an introvert, a sensor or an intuitive, a thinker or a feeler, a judger or a perceiver. And you end up getting sort of assigned one of those. Now, you'll still be rated as high or low or moderate on each one of these things. And so sometimes when you take the test, you might be rated as high on extroversion but moderate on being an introvert as well. So again, it's not dividing things into these really discrete categories as a yes, you're extroverted and no, you're not introverted. We still want to look for those strong versus weak indices. And I'm going to hopefully provide you with an opportunity to play around a little bit with this so you can see where you literally rate on these personality scales. Again, this is the one that we see used pretty consistently throughout business and lots of employment, and even actually I would say a lot of the student assessments that we do now have this Myers-Briggs incorporated. So that's the trait perspective of personality.